So you'll probably be getting a little note saying that we are now being recorded. So welcome everyone. My name is Jamie Vbach and I am the Will County Director with the Conservation Foundation. So you know this is a webinar format, so everyone's muted, your cameras are off, and this will be recorded for everyone to enjoy later. The recordings are stored on our YouTube channel, so if you happen to have to leave before the end or whatever, you can always go ahead and check out our YouTube channel to get this recording. It'll be up in the next day or so. As well, all of our previous webinars also live on that YouTube channel, so feel free to go check out some past webinars you may have missed, other topics you might be interested in, that sort of thing. If you have a question during this webinar, please use the Q&A box. I know different webinars like different formats and things. Personally, I prefer the Q&A box. It makes it a lot easier to keep the questions organized and helps us to see them a little bit better. Sometimes in the chat, things can get lost. So even if you're not seeing them, you are able to post to us, not to each other. So if you do have comments to make, feel free to make any comments you want in the chat box, but use that Q&A box for questions. We'll answer them as best we can at the end of the presentation. So little TCF housekeeping, these webinars are offered to the public for free, but we do encourage you to consider a donation or a membership. The more people we have attending these and the more we do, the more it does cost us to run them. So at the end of the webinar, you'll be taken to a page with a whole bunch of resources that you might be interested in. Things like our Bringing Nature Home brochure and information on pollinator gardens and rain gardens and things like that. But there's also our virtual tip jar. So if you're enjoying these webinars, I do encourage you to donate to help keep us running. This also makes you a member so that you can enjoy our wide variety of members only stuff. Upcoming webinars, so we are not going to have a webinar on Thursday or the following Monday due to the 4th of July holiday. I just found people aren't that interested in webinars right around holiday time. So we're gonna skip those, but we will be back on Thursday, July 9th with Bringing Butterflies to Your Yard. So I'll be talking about different butterfly species that are in the area here and what plants that you can plant to attract them to your yard. All right, so now that I have that out of the way, we have 46 people in the room, so that is wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. There we go. And we'll go ahead and start there. And let's talk about some common invasive species and what you can plant instead. So there's my contact information there. If you got emails about this webinar, they usually come with my email address attached. So if you have any questions, please feel free, drop me an email. My phone number is there, but I am working from home still, so I'll get the message, but I'm not gonna answer. So I'm not there to answer. So email is always the best way to get a hold of me anyway. So as I mentioned, whoops, there we go. We are the Conservation Foundation, and we are a 501c3. That means we are a nonprofit, and our goal is to protect the health of our communities. So all of this great work that we do, it helps nature, it helps the birds and the butterflies, but it also helps to protect our health as well. And we are an accredited land trust, which is really awesome. It's really difficult to do, and it's kind of an amazing thing that we were able to get. So it just says that we're doing the right things in the right way, and really all about the good work that we're doing. So we help to protect land. And you can see by this map all the different areas that we work in. We say Kane, Kendall, DuPage, and Will counties in Illinois are our big service area, but we really work in about 7 different areas. So you can see we've really had a hand in helping to protect lots of land across the suburban Chicago area. And conserving open space, again, as I mentioned, it preserves our quality of life. So preserves our drinking water, our water quality, air quality, habitat. It gives kids a place to play and explore outside, which is super, super important. And we are working on rescheduling that webinar about getting kids outside. So keep an eye out for that. And it again helps to make sure that future generations have all this great stuff that we're able to enjoy. I mentioned I just got back from Wisconsin. My family has a place in northern Wisconsin where we stayed, and on our property there, I was so excited to see there was pileated woodpecker nest. And we almost wouldn't have found it, except the kids were making all kinds of noise when mom came back with food. And that was the only reason we saw it. But one of the babies, every time we drove by, had his head sticking out the window, or, the window, the entrance to the nest, like he was looking for mom. And then I get a chance to see mom too. And like stuff like that's just so, so important. My son's still up there fishing right now. And I know he's having an amazing time with his grandparents, getting a chance to be outside, be a kid, and just experience being outside and away from screens. Anyway, back to the topic. So what is an invasive plant? So we talk a lot at the Conservation Foundation about native plants. And an invasive plant is sort of the opposite of a native plant. So a native plant is native because that's the area where it's adapted to live, where it's from originally, where it's been found for, maybe thousands of years, and it's adapted alongside the pollinators and the animals and other things in that area to be a part of that ecosystem. A plant becomes invasive when we take it out of that ecosystem then and put it someplace else. And when we do that, it's not adapted to be a part of that ecosystem there. So the insects and birds and things don't recognize it, so they don't necessarily use it as a food source. Sometimes they do, sometimes it's okay, but they spread the seeds. It grows generally unchecked. So there's nothing helping to keep that population in check so that it stays in a balanced ecosystem. And that's the big thing, is it unbalances the ecosystem so that the things that are supposed to be there, the things that have been there for thousands of years that the insects are using, all get crowded out. So it reduces the species diversity. So there aren't as many different types of insects or birds or aquatic invertebrates or amphibians, whatever. It really helps to or it doesn't help, but I mean, it causes a reduction in numbers of those organisms. So it creates a sort of monoculture of itself. And they're really adapted kind of in an amazing way to do that. It's really, you gotta have some respect for these things, because man, they've got some amazing adaptations that allow them to do this. It's terrible for our ecosystem, but you gotta have some respect for it. So how do we get rid of them? So when we have these plants and they show up on their own, so many of the things that, when you hear people say, oh, native plants are weeds, a lot of times these are the plants they're talking about. They're actually not native things. People think that just because they came up on their own, they're native. A lot of times birds or other animals are spreading the seeds. Birds will eat seeds or berries and things, and then they poop out the seeds. So, now the seed has a nice little packet of fertilizer to go along with it that helps them to grow again. So chances are good you have some invasive species on your property. So how do we get rid of them? Well, step one is always identification. So figuring out what it is you have, and then how do we get rid of it? So there are cultural controls. Number one, don't plant them. Some of these things are still for sale in the nursery trades. Sometimes they're sold as sterile cultivars. I'll give you a pro tip. If you've ever seen Jurassic Park, nature finds a way. Things they say are sterile rarely are or don't stay that way. All it takes is some cross-pollination with another one and boom, they're causing problems again. So don't plant them. Monitor your own land so you can figure out what you have and hopefully catch an infestation before it gets really bad. And you can also educate your friends and neighbors. I'm talking to someone over email right now whose neighbor brought in a plant from another country and planted it, and now it's going everywhere. It's on her property now and just keeps showing up over and over and over again. Helping to educate other people about why these things are bad, why we don't want to plant them, even if they're pretty, even if they're edible maybe or whatever. Just don't do it. They cause more problems than they're worth. They get into our open spaces and they really, really cause problems. Mechanical controls. So first step, pull, dig, cut, or mow, right? Mechanical controls. Get that out of there, get it out before it produces seed. So a lot of times getting these things in flower is a good time because they've used all their energy to make these flowers. And then if you cut them off then, that prevents those seeds from being made. Mowing is another really good preventative measure. In natural areas where burning isn't possible, maybe because it's too close to houses or other structures, mowing is perfectly acceptable. It has a very similar function in that it gets rid of that biomass at the top, and then what's underground, there's not enough left there to sustain it. Where in native plants, it's kind of the other way around. What you see at the top is just a very small part of that plant's body, if you want to think of it like that. The roots and everything else that's growing underground, they're perfectly fine if you cut the tops off. They may come back a little bit stunted or a little bit smaller if they're mowed at the wrong time, but generally they're going to be fine. But the invasive species have a hard time with that. Now, don't shoot the messenger. I know a lot of people have some big issues with Roundup and Monsanto and herbicides and things, and we absolutely do not want to overuse those things. But judicious, proper use of some of these chemicals is sometimes the only way to get rid of these invasive things. So honeysuckle is the big example. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But if you cut honeysuckle, it comes back angry. If you don't get all that, if you don't dig up all the roots, it comes back 10 times worse. You cut one stump, you get 10 suckers. And now the plant is even bigger. You have to treat it in order to get rid of it, unless you're able to completely dig up the roots. So, and that's how it goes on a lot of this. So I will mention which chemicals can treat it, but if you can treat it, pull, dig, cut, mow, if you can do that, that's your first line of defense. And hey, if you can burn, if you're comfortable doing it, if you learn and are educated and can manage that, that's great. I burn my rain garden almost every year. But I make sure the conditions are right. I make sure I've got plenty of water around there. It's a small area. And so I take very big precautions about doing it. So, and hey, there's trainings you can go to if you really want to get into that. The forest preserves and other people like that are always looking for people who want to learn how to burn. So these are all methods of getting rid of these nasty things. So let's go right into it. So I mentioned Japanese honeysuckle already, Amur honeysuckle, Japanese honeysuckle. There's several different names for them, several different actual species of them, but this is what it looks like. So they've got those opposite leaves. That means when you look at a branch, you see the leaves are right across from each other. Alternate leaves, the leaves would be kind of like this on the branch, but opposite, they're like this. So they've got red berries on them. Early in the spring, they get these white or pink flowers. So they're just about done blooming now, so we'll probably start to see the berries on them pretty soon. So there is at least one native species of it, but for the most part, if you see this out in the wild, if you see it somewhere you did not plant it, it's gonna be one of these invasive ones. Part of why they're so nasty, they're okay growing in sun, in shade, where it's wet, where it's dry. They really don't care. So they leaf out early, they hold their leaves until late, and they make this just impenetrable green wall. So anywhere you go in a forest preserve, along a trail, things like that, where you see just a mass of plant material, chances are pretty good there's honeysuckle in there, because as you can see from the shrub on the right there, I mean, it just creates this very dense, multi-trunked, massive plant. But they're terrible. They spread absolutely everywhere. And birds will eat the berries, but as I mentioned before, then they poop them out and spread more. This stuff, it grows everywhere. I see it everywhere. Robins may nest in it, of having their nests predated. So that means something like a raccoon or something like that has a better chance of getting at their nest. It also leads to a decline in amphibian populations. So studies have been done. Why? Didn't really say, but amphibians declined when there was lots of honeysuckle around. So if you're looking to remove this, again, you can cut, but you have to treat it. So I mentioned back in this slide here, if you're using these chemicals, you don't want to just go in and start spraying everywhere. If you talk to people in the restoration business, one of the best ways to get rid of this is you cut the trunks, and then you take those foam paintbrushes that are over there, disposable foam paintbrushes. You want to follow the directions on the container, make sure you're wearing gloves, make sure you're wearing long sleeves, closed-toed shoes, all that kind of thing, all your appropriate PPE, and use one of those foam paintbrushes to paint the product onto the stump. That way you're not spraying it around everything else around it. You're not getting it into the soil. You're not getting it other places. You're just keeping it right there where it needs to be, right on that stump. When you first cut things, the plant's still trying to move water and sugars and things up and down the stem. So when you put that chemical on there right after you cut it, it ends up getting soaked down into the roots. So that's what helps to kill it. And so that'll keep it from resprouting, hopefully. So that's how you treat with this. So you want, if you're going to use a chemical on this, then it's glyphosate, which is Roundup, and you want the highest concentration you can find, about a 50% if you can find it. I have found that at some of the big box stores. It can be tricky to find, but you want to look to whatever product you're using, look for active ingredient, and it'll say triclopyr or glyphosate or something like that. 50% glyphosate on these cut stumps will take care of it. I've been fighting an infestation of this in my backyard for going on 3 years now, making some decent headway, but generally treating it in that way has prevented the stuff from resprouting again. Also, apparently goats like to eat it. So if you have access to some goats and want to bring some goats in, goats will eat it. That will help as well. And you can also do flame weeding, which basically means burning. So if you can burn an area with this stuff in it, that will help to take care of it as well. But you're going to have to do it multiple times. So one application of the flames is not going to be enough. All right, next up we have autumn olive or Russian olive. This is another one. It fixes nitrogen, which changes the soil content. So in some cases, things like legumes, beans, things like that put nitrogen in the soil, which is a good thing if it's a garden, but if it's out in the woods, it can really change the soils out there and make them sort of inhospitable for the native plants that we want there. And because of that too, the leaf litter affects the nutrients in streams too. So if that leaf litter gets into our streams and our waterways, it can affect the nutrients in there, which is really bad news for our aquatic invertebrates. It again also grows very, very densely and will outcompete a lot of our native things in there. The berries are edible, but again, you know, the usual caveat of know what you're eating. I would never advocate people just go out and start randomly throwing things in their mouth. Make sure you 100% know what something is before you try to eat it. Removing autumn olive or Russian olive, you can hand pull. Sometimes the roots are shallow enough that you can get that out. You can also cut it and then treat the stumps again with glyphosate in the fall or winter. Or apparently flame weeding the base. So again, fire is another one. In the preserves and places where that's easily done, that's something that you can do there as well. Next, burning bush. Okay, so this is a big one because this one is used a ton in landscaping. So there is a native euonymus, which is the family that burning bush is in. It's sometimes has the common name of wahoo. but the winged euonymus is the really bad guy. So if you look at the stems, you'll see little wings like growths on the stem. That's the winged burning bush. That's the bad guy. That's the one that's really getting out. So this is another one that people planted it, and it's now escaped cultivation. It's in the preserves. It's showing up in natural areas and really causing problems out there. Again, it forms very dense stands like we talked about, and birds will spread the seeds of it. So for this one, removal is cut and dig if you can. And then if that fails, then you can also use that glyphosate treatment in the fall or winter. And our friend Multiflora rose. This one, if you've been out in any of the preserves, you've probably seen this out there. It shows up absolutely everywhere. This is also in my stand of honeysuckle and other nasty stuff at the back of my yard. There was a big nasty one of these guys, and again, typical rose, it's got big old nasty thorns on it. So the canes, which is what they call those long stems, form impenetrable thickets. Because they have these thorns on them, nothing is getting through there, and it's really, I went out and bought special gloves so that I could take care of all of this because I was getting so scratched up by it. Fun fact, if you're trying to find gloves for this, go into Lowe's or Home Depot, whatever, find the gloves that you like, try one on, and then go into their plant department and grab a rose bush. That's how you test out how strong these gloves are. That's what I did. I found a great pair. Anyway, so their canes they sort of flop over, and even where they touch the ground, they can take root. So now they just have this big tangled mess. So yeah, so definitely want to get this guy out of there. Animals will disperse the seeds just like any rose. It does make, the hips, and animals can eat the hips. So you've got that. And that's mostly how it spreads. Plus the canes can break off and restart. So they can also damage trees because they will kind of climb a little bit. They can kind of latch onto tree branches and weaken them and break off tree branches. So birds may nest in it, but again, like with the honeysuckle, there's a higher chance that their nest will be predated by something. So if you want to get rid of this stuff, cutting and mowing it until it stops coming back is a really good way to do it too. So you can also try and dig up the roots. So I would advise to cut it first so you're not on those canes kind of waving around. But cutting it, you can also treat it with glyphosate if you need to. But cutting it repeatedly should help to take care of it. So instead of those kinds of shrubby little things, these are some native things you can plant instead. 9-bark is absolutely gorgeous. It's got these really pretty purplish leaves on them. I just planted a couple of them this year, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they look like in the fall. New Jersey tea is gorgeous. Fragrant sumac is another really pretty one that has great fall foliage to it. Spicebush too, look how strikingly yellow that is. Spicebush is also the host plant for a spicebush swallowtail, which is a beautiful native butterfly that has very weird looking caterpillars. I guarantee you I will talk about it in my butterfly presentation because, hey, I like the weird things. So yeah, so spicebush is a great one too. And then wahoo, as I mentioned, that's our native euonymus. So if you're looking to plant something instead of a burning bush, that's a good one to pick instead. Again, all of these are kind of shrubby and can take the place. A lot of people say that they like things like honeysuckle because they make a nice screen from their neighbors. Don't do it. Any one of these is a much better choice. All right, moving on to the trees. So buckthorn, this is another one that it's probably my top 10 worst, top 3 worst invasives. And so buckthorn comes from Europe. The two major species of it that we have here are called either glossy or common buckthorn, but they basically look the same. They have kind of those shiny leaves, very deep lobes in them. They make those small black berry-like fruits, but they will also make these just dense thickets of stuff. You find them frequently in with honeysuckle because they're dispersed the same way. The berries aren't a favorite of birds, but they will eat them when they're coming through. Buckthorn was actually recommended to be planted by the Morton Arboretum back in like the 50s because they recommended it for municipalities to plant because they were one of the first things to get leaves in the spring and one of the last things to lose their leaves in the fall. So, you know, they thought, oh, this makes it a great municipal tree and it stays kind of small and it's great, except that it spreads like crazy. And on top of it, those berries, when the birds eat them, it actually gives the birds diarrhea, which means like if you or I get sick and we have that symptom, we know to stay hydrated and things. Birds don't do that. And so this bush, tree, whatever you want to call it, has been partially responsible for the decline in birds in this area, especially the smaller songbirds. As they're migrating through, they eat these, they get sick, and it just dehydrates them until they die. So really, really bad thing for the birds. So we want to get that out of there. Starlings especially seem to like them. So, you know, if you don't like those big clusters of starlings emptying your bird feeder and making so much racket at sunset, get rid of this guy. Oh, and the leaf litter, this is kind of weird. The leaf litter stimulates earthworm activity. So when the leaves do fall, the earthworms go nuts and start eating up everything, which means the leaf litter that a lot of other insects and animals and things rely on to overwinter in, they're gone. The earthworms eat it all and it decomposes much, much faster than what we want. And so it can just completely clear these areas of leaf litter. And that's things that, you know, the plants, the insects, they all depend on that leaf litter to help them overwinter. It also increases the nitrogen content in the soil, which discourages native plants too. And it harbors some agricultural pests like aphids and a type of rust. So this guy is just really bad news. So we definitely want to get him out of there when we can. So removal, again, repeated cutting and or fire is a really good method to get rid of it. You can also do the same cut stump and treat the cut stump with either triclopyr or glyphosate. Cutting it in the winter is a good time to do it when it's more dormant. So yeah, so we got to get this guy out of here. He's really bad. And the Chicago Region Trees Initiative did a survey of canopy components. And so what trees are making up our canopy? And unfortunately, buckthorn makes up a ridiculous amount of the canopy here in the Chicago region. So we've been working really hard at it, but it seems like a losing battle. So we got to get that guy out of there and get some better stuff planted. So another one that you might see in very disturbed areas, they like very urban areas for some reason. So you see it in sometimes very blighted areas of the city, is this tree of heaven. I will say I have some friends who refer to it with a different name, sort of the opposite end of the spectrum of where it came from. Definitely not heaven. This tree can grow over 80 feet tall. So, I mean, this is definitely a big, big tree, but it forms really dense colonies and it has really aggressive roots, which means they damage the foundations and the sewer lines, and they can really cause a lot of problems. Again, remember that you see this growing in very disturbed areas a lot. They don't care how salty the soil is. They don't care how poor the soil is, how polluted it is. This guy's going to grow anywhere. And check out those massive seeds that they make. So very, very tricky things. If you are removing this, Cut and handle it with care though, because it contains some chemicals that can cause headaches and heart problems for some people. So not quite like poison ivy, but definitely want to take some care with this guy. And then removal of it, you can cut and herbicide it, again, like we mentioned it with the glyphosate, and then you have to treat the suckers because it's going to sucker back up again. But cutting in fall and winter is going to be your best time to do that. So instead, if you're looking for other plants, blue beech is a great one. I just planted one of these this year. Looking forward to seeing that one grow. Red buds, if you've got a shadier area, red buds are absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous trees, but they're an understory tree, so they like it shady. So you don't want to plant this guy in full sun, but if you've got a nice shady area, you're looking for a really gorgeous tree, that's a great one. And serviceberry is another good one. That one's the berries that the birds really like the berries on that one. So that's a great tree to plant for wildlife as well. Also, some other great options here. You got witch hazel, elderberry, the dogwoods. I love red twig dogwood, especially in the winter time. Those red twigs on it. I mean, because that's what the stems are actually red, like the name would suggest. Just gorgeous up against the snow in the winter time. And elderberry, another one. We can eat the berries on it. It's edible by us. People make all kinds of syrups and things out of them too. And then witch hazel is another really fun one. Again, you guys know me, I like my weird stuff. Witch hazel blooms at really bizarre times. You can see that photo at the top there. There's still snow on the ground. Witch hazel will bloom in, depends on the kind you get, but like November or February, like it's blooming when absolutely nothing else is. So it's kind of a cool one. And just look at that flower. How bizarre is that flower? I love it. All right, ground covers. A lot of people are looking for ground covers and they turn to Vinca minor, also known as periwinkle. Likes to grow in the shade, but it escapes the gardens, and check out that natural area there on the right. It escaped from a garden, got into this area, and it's just choked out everything. I mean, you don't see anything growing more than a couple inches tall there because it's killed it all. So the leaves are toxic, so nothing's eating the leaves. The seeds are too small to be food, so it's not feeding anything. It's suppressing all of our native things that would feed our birds and our pollinators, and just, I mean, it just, look at that. It's so scorched earth looking there. It's crazy. Removal of it is tough because little bits of it break off and can start growing again. If you leave the roots in, it'll just come back. So, so you can try pulling it by hand, but most of the people I know that do that say it just keeps coming back. So you can try spraying it with glyphosate as a foliar spray, so spraying it on the leaves, but you got to be careful you're not getting it onto other things around it. So really, really tough little guy to get rid of. Do not plant this. So it makes me crazy. So yeah, so that's Vinca minor. Instead, there's lots of nice native ground covers that you can plant. Wild ginger is by far my favorite. I love wild ginger. Those big heart-shaped leaves, and it grows in the shade. It grows around trees. I've got some planted by one of my pine trees, and it's formed this very nice cluster. You know, it doesn't get out of control at all, but it does form a nice ground cover-like mat. And even around pine trees, where a lot of things won't grow because of the acidity of the soil. So wild ginger is definitely one of my favorites. Wild phlox is another one. Similar look, similar kind of flower, but native, and grows really well amongst other things. Canada anemone is another really cute one. Got cute little flowers on it and a really pretty leaf. Wild petunias are another one. Smaller than what you would see on our normal commercial type annual petunias, but this is a native one. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the water loving guys. So first up here is purple loosestrife. This stuff, oh, this stuff is nasty. So this is one of the few plants that many places actually have laws against planting this. That's just how terrible this stuff is. It is a prolific seeder. I saw somewhere that said each plant every season can produce 2 million seeds. Every season, 2 million seeds. That's ridiculous. It tolerates a wide variety of water conditions, so it likes being in places where it's wet, but if it dries out, hey, that's fine too. If you break a piece off, that piece will reproduce. So it can reproduce from broken pieces as well as those 2 million seeds. Some reports estimate it now occupies 500,000 acres in the United States. That's crazy. So it crowds out all the native stuff. It's caused declines in lots of plant species, turtle species, birds. I mean, this stuff is awful. So a lot of places are trying to get rid of it, but it's so hard to get rid of. It also reduces the pollination of native species. So like insects are going to pollinate this instead of the native stuff. So it's just, it's awful. And, you know, removal of this, if you have a really large infestation, good luck. The only things you can do is to try and prevent seed germination, again, by removing those seed heads, probably burning any of the material that you remove so that it doesn't just resprout. They're trying some insects, the type of beetle that they've had a little bit of luck with, trying to get that to just devour this stuff, but we all know how that's gone in the past. You can use glyphosate, but it's really tricky to do because it'll kill everything else too. And you have to spray it because there's just so much of it. And then being around water, you got to be really careful using glyphosate around water. This stuff is terrible. So don't. Okay, Phragmites, very, very similar, unfortunately, to purple loosestrife. It forms these really dense dome-shaped masses. You see this a lot on roadsides. Anywhere there's a ditch that gets some water and doesn't get mowed very often, you're gonna find this stuff. Look how tall it grows too. Look at that guy. You know, I don't know how tall he is, but he's not a short guy. You know, the stuff will grow 8 feet tall. And those little plumes at the top there, full of seeds. Those are all seeds up there. So stands of this will get in and consume shallow ponds. It leads to bank or shoreline erosion. It can clog waterways. You know, again, shades out all the other plants. Red-winged blackbirds like it, but it also eliminates habitat for other birds. So again, removal of this stuff is really tough because it likes to be in wet areas, and because it's commonly found in wet areas, you're really limited as to how you can treat it. Burning will work, but only if there's no standing water. Herbicide can work, but again, hard to use around water. And you may even need permits if you want to use an herbicide around it. So this is one, man, if you've got a large stand of it, you really need to consult the professionals because it gets bad. So what can you use in a pond or around a wetland area? Lots of other great choices. Blue flag iris loves to have its feet in water. That means the roots can be in standing water all the time. It doesn't care, it likes it. Sedges, big blue stem, Joe Pye weed, all of these perfect plants to use in a wetland area to try and drive out that Phragmites. Garlic mustard, this is another nasty one, and you find it everywhere. So it was brought over from Europe, I don't know when, a couple hundred years ago, but it was used as a food plant. Seeds may have been brought over just in the soil of other plants that they brought over here. But, you know, this is one, like I mentioned in the beginning, you really got to have respect for this guy because the strategies that it has for survival are just really incredible. It colonizes entire areas by inhibiting the mycorrhizal fungi that other plants use. So there are these fungi, microscopic fungi in the soil. Many plants their roots sort of have a symbiotic sort of relationship with these fungi. So the fungi break down things, you know, they do all the decomposition and they provide nutrients, and then the roots take some of that nutrient then to use, and that's how they grow, because they can't take in those nutrients on their own otherwise. Garlic mustard kills off all those fungi. So it's got antifungal properties to it, I guess. And so these other plants can't survive. So it kills them off. And it also just spreads itself by roots, but also by seeds. You can see at the top here where these flowers are. These are all going to be seeds, and it makes, you know, little spikes of lots of different seeds. So it just really creates this perfect storm for itself, just to create these colonies of things. It does threaten 2 native butterfly species. Those butterfly species would normally lay their eggs on native members of the mustard family. So, you know, they kind of get confused and they see this and, well, that's a mustard, that'll work. But garlic mustard contains compounds that will kill the caterpillars. So one type of butterfly from Virginia in particular is threatened partially because of garlic mustard. So really, really nasty stuff. It is edible. Again, usual caveats, know what you're eating, but it makes a great pesto. You can, you know, grind it up with some oil and whatever. It's got a very garlicky flavor to it. And that is one of the ways that you can identify it. If you break off a leaf and crush it up and smell it, it should smell garlicky. If it doesn't, it's not this. The flowers are gone. Basically now you'd be seeing the seed heads. But you know, you see them all over the roadsides and lots of areas. You know, I've got some in my yard. The good news is they're really easy to pull. So if you have a small amount of this stuff, pulling it is actually a really good way to help control it. The downside is then you stir up the seed bed a little bit, which can bring fresh seeds that have been laying dormant up to the surface. So you're probably going to be fighting it for a while, but the more you pull, the less you're going to see. And then on top of that, remove the plants, because in another interesting twist, this diabolical plant, even after you pull it, most things will just die. Garlic mustard will continue to develop the seeds. It'll take all of the energy stored in the roots and in the rest of the plant and just push it to seed development. So the seeds will continue to develop and it'll drop the seeds. So you were trying to get rid of it, you've just helped it to spread its seeds instead. So pull it, bag it, toss it. Burning, I think, is effective as well, but you don't want to wait till it dries out, unfortunately. So you got to like do it quick. I just bag it and put it in the trash myself when I pull it in my yard. But it does supposedly have lots of vitamin A and C in it. So there you go. It's healthy. We need to start some kind of campaign on eating garlic mustard, I guess. And instead you can plant some of these lovely little guys. Butterfly weed, I always recommend everybody plant butterfly weed because that's how you bring in monarchs. And it's just this gorgeous orange flower too. Wild hyacinths are really pretty and they bloom early in the year. I love those. They're just gorgeous flowers too. And then asters bloom in the fall, which makes them a really great fall food source for lots of different pollinators and other migrating insects. Finally, our last invasive species is lawn. Lawn is the #1 irrigated crop in the US. 40 million acres of lawn, and we spend a ton of money to maintain our lawns. Money, water, fertilizers, putting gas in our lawn mowers to mow it, all of that. Grass is actually like the #1 crop in many of the lower 48 states. It's crazy. We spend all this time and money to maintain something that from a biological standpoint is kind of inert, right? It doesn't really feed much of anything. There's no flowers for the pollinators. There's no seeds for the birds. it's just kind of there. You know, it's a trend that was started by the English for wealthy landowners to show off their wealth, that you could have this large area of non-productive land. So you could have just this large area that you maintain and you don't grow any crops on, and it doesn't make you any food, and it doesn't do anything for you. It's just this big area to recreate in. So then we brought that mindset over here to the US, and now we all have to show off how we have all this time and money on our hands that we can maintain this pointless crop. So grass is hugely invasive, and it's not from here either. So depending on the type of grass that you have, many of them are actually native to the Middle East, where the sandy soils there, it makes sense that you would have that very shallow net-like root system to hold on to very shallow, very sandy soils. That's not the kind of soil that we have here. So that's why we have to spend so much money and water and chemicals on it to try and fool it into thinking that it's back where it's supposed to be. Instead, you can plant like literally anything else. You know, increase the size of your flower beds, add new flower beds. You can plant some native types of grasses instead if you really want that kind of lawn-like look or feel. There's buffalo grass, although I've been told buffalo grass doesn't grow so well in clay soils, but there are sedges, pen sedge, Carex pennsylvanicus is what it's called. Pen sedge is lovely. It's a nice soft kind of sedge that you can use as a grass replacement. It just sort of flops over. So the upside is you don't even have to mow it very often because it just doesn't get very tall. So lots of other things that you can do instead of grass. So if you are bringing natives into your yard, some things to consider. What's your soil type? Do you have well-drained sandy soils? Well, around the Chicago area, probably not. We have very heavy clay soils here, very compact. So that's something to keep in mind. Some things like pine trees that they're very fond of planting around here really don't like compact clay-filled soils, so they're not going to grow very well. What's your sun conditions like? Are you shade, part shade, sun? And is your soil wet, dry, or mesic? Mesic is a kind of a fancy word that's sort of the Goldilocks thing. So it's not too wet, it's not too dry. Mesic is right there in the middle. So you have to figure out these conditions of your yard. Observe that part of your yard at different times of the day. See how much sun it actually gets. I have a berm in my yard that I thought was full sun. And so I actually bought a bunch of plants to put on it that was full sun. And as I'm planting them there, I realized I'm sitting in the shade most of the time while I'm planting these. Oh, these trees got a little bit bigger than I thought they were. And now my berm is actually part shade. So we'll see. Hopefully my sunny stuff makes it there. So things to think about. We have our Conservation at Home program through the Conservation Foundation, where we encourage everybody to plant native plants in your yard. Visits to your home, if you are within our service area, are free of charge. Drop me an email and I can help set you up with the right person if you're in Kane, Kendall, DuPage, or Will counties. If you're outside of those areas, drop me an email anyway. We have a couple of franchisee organizations that we work with, and those organizations do the same thing. They'll come out and they'll talk to you about native plants you can put in your yard, or if you already have lots of native plants in your yard, they can get you that handy dandy little sign to put up that tells all your neighbors, hey, look what I'm doing something really good here. So drop me an email, and even if we don't have somebody in that area, we can generally point you in the right direction. So please feel free. And then if you do want to get certified, we do ask for a donation if you can afford it, so that it just covers the cost of our time and the signs and everything like that. But the initial consultation visit is free, and you don't have to get certified. So if you just want us to come out and you just want to show us your yard, I love that too. So why do we talk so much about using natives? So I mentioned in the beginning that, this is where they're from. This is where they're used to. They're used to our growing conditions. They're used to our soils. They're used to our, really wet springs and our hot, dry summers. But when you plant native plants, that leads to pollinators, caterpillars, insects using those plants. And when you get caterpillars, then you get birds. So caterpillars are like super nutrient dense little packages for birds to feed their babies. If you ever watched a bird feed their baby, it looks actually kind of violent. They're like shoving stuff down the baby's throats. Well, caterpillars are the perfect thing to do that. They're nice and squishy and nutrient dense. Some people even say that they looked at the nutrient content. They're even more nutrient dense than beef. So it's crazy. There's so many nutrients in these little guys. And then when you get those birds, sometimes you get other birds as well. And now you're a part of the ecosystem instead of being apart from the ecosystem. Your yard is joining in with all the other open space and the forest preserves and everything else to really help create this great ecosystem that protects our way of life. It protects our water. It protects our food sources. It protects our waterways, our air, all of this stuff. So native plants, planting whatever happens to be native in your area, is a way to help Mother Nature. If you are looking for other ways to get involved with the Conservation Foundation, you can become a member. I mentioned any amount of donation makes you a member for a year, and then you'll get emails and newsletters and all the kind of stuff. Basically, keep apprised of all the wonderful things that we are doing. You can also visit the McDonald Farm in Naperville or our Dixon Merced Farm in Montgomery. Our McDonald Farm is actually a working farm. It's, I'm assuming, one of the last 60-acre farms left in Naperville. It's an organic farm. There is a CSA there that works to feed about 500 people, 500 families in our area, and it's some of the best produce ever. We are sold out for this year. This is the first year that's happened this early on. But if becoming a part of that CSA is something you're interested in, then check it out for next year. You can also follow us on social media. You'll find out all about other webinars that we're doing, as well as everything else that we're doing. And you can get your yard certified, like we mentioned, through our Conservation at Home program. All right, at this point, I will stop, and I see we've got a couple of questions here. So we will take a look and see what we have here. All right. Okay, so let's see. All right, so we've got some questions here. Some of these, I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to be able to answer because I'm not super familiar. I have to go back and read the labels on these chemicals. So the big thing, if you ever take an herbicide training class, so I am certified through the state of Illinois to use herbicides. If you're using them on your own property, it's not a big deal. If you're using them elsewhere, that's when you need to be certified. So I am certified, and the number one thing, the answer to almost every question on that test is read the label. So Kathy wants to know if glyphosate goes bad if it's stored well in the original container. I'm really not sure about that. I would have to read the label and see what it says. Nihad wants to know, what's a lawn replacement that can be played on? We have heavy clay soils. Yeah, me too. Penn sedge, Carex pennsylvanicus is the binomial for it. That's a really good lawn replacement that doesn't mind clay soils. I did an experiment this spring with buffalo grass. I planted it too early though, and so now I just have a whole bunch of weeds in it. And it supposedly doesn't like heavy clay soils anyway. So I would look into a sedge like Penn sedge. Evergreen, okay. Evergreen native trees for clay soil. I don't think there are any. There are not too many evergreens that are native to this area. We're a little too far south. If you go up into Wisconsin, then you get more into their range. So there may be a few like cedars and things, but generally evergreens don't like heavy clay. They like a well-drained sandy soil. So the original landscapers of my house put they threw in a dozen evergreen trees and called it a day, various types and species and things. And that was about 20 years ago. So now they're all about 60 feet tall and they are all dying. They look terrible because their lower branches are all bare. And I am now in the process of trying to remove a whole bunch of really tall, ugly looking trees. I really don't recommend evergreens. There are so many other better choices for this area. And Jan, feel free to chime in if you know of any, but generally I don't talk about using evergreens here just because they're just not great. Good native plants for creating a good hedge. Well, we mentioned some of them. A lot's going to depend on whether it's sunny or shady, wet or dry. There are, let's see. I'm losing all my names of things now. Let me go back to my hedge. Here we go. So 9 barks, fragrant sumac, spice bush, wahoo, all of those are good. All of those can, you know, you can make hedge out of all of those, I think. There are also dogwoods, some dogwoods, you can do that. But yeah, lots of good native choices. The Morton Arboretum, or the Chicago Region Trees Initiative more specifically, has a Healthy Hedges brochure. If you check out the Chicago Region Trees Initiative or look up Healthy Hedges, they've got a great brochure that lists a lot of good non-invasive types of shrubs for that.
Hey Jamie, this is Jan.
Hey Jan.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, if I am putting in the chat the website for the Chicago Healthy Hedges, where you can go and go directly to the link, and they have like a Healthy Hedges poster, and it gives you a sample of all different stuff. So I'll type that in the chat box now.
Great. Thank you so much, Jan. Tips on getting rid of mint in landscaping. Oh, good luck on that one too. That's another really tricky one. All mints have a tendency to be really, really aggressive. Interestingly, you can tell a mint if you take the stem in your fingers and kind of twist it like this. You'll feel mint have square stems. So you'll be able to feel the edges as you roll it around. You can feel that it's square. So lots of common edible things are mints. A lot of the herbs that we use are mints, but they get really tricky. I know lots of people who have tried things, everything from like sinking a bucket in the ground and then trying to plant in that. It doesn't work. Jan, you sent that privately to me. You need to change it to the whole group. So again, unfortunately, digging, you know, cutting and digging is big. Yeah, and then other than that, trying to spray it, you know, using glyphosate or something like that, being as careful as you can not to get it on other things surrounding it. But yeah, mowing it, just, yeah, good luck. Mints are very, very tricky. Norma wants to know, is clover a good solution for grass replacement? Yeah, it can be. There are actually some nice clover types that are like micro clovers and things that can work as a grass replacement as well. I've heard of that being done. I know some people who are kind of experimenting with that in their yards. Personally, I have a lot of clover in my yard. That's because I don't care. I just let it grow in my yard, along with, I've got creeping Charlie that I also don't care about and think looks prettier than grass. I'm sure my neighbors hate me, but yeah, I've got dandelions in my yard. I've got clovers in my yard. That's just kind of how it goes. All right. Yeah, we answered that one too. Ferns. Peter wants to know, what's your take on ferns? Ferns are great. I love ferns, especially in shady areas and damp shady areas. There are several very lovely native ferns that work really, really well in native landscaping. Yeah, there's a few that we recommend, but yeah, I've seen ferns grow great. Let's see. Creeping Charlie. Yeah, Creeping Charlie is another one. So it's got these little purple flowers and it tends to grow in grass. It's really hard to get rid of. That's another one. So I mean, that's me. And I know a lot of people will probably fight me on it, but it doesn't bother me. It's, some of the pollinators will use it. It doesn't have as many of the downsides as some of the other native stuff or the invasive stuff that we talked about today. So I think the flowers are a little bit prettier than grass. So Creeping Charlie, the same as ground ivy, probably. That's the problem with common names, is sometimes there are multiple names for the same plant or multiple plants that have the same name. But generally, Creeping Charlie to me has little leaves and kind of little stalks of purplish flowers on it. It's different from henbit, which looks kind of similar but grows up a little bit taller. Edible native plants for landscaping in addition to elderberry. Oh, Dean, there's a few. We actually did a whole webinar on this topic a couple weeks back. If you go to our YouTube channel, there's a whole webinar on edible native plants for landscaping. She talks a lot about trees and things in there, but maybe we'll bring her back next month to talk about some other things too. Oh, Sarah says, my mom got rid of her mint. She used bonide stump and vine killer. She cut them down to 1 inch and painted the stump killer on the fresh cut spot. It's all gone now. Okay, that sounds good. Is staghorn sumac yard friendly? Oh, great question, Jennifer. So I have sort of a love-hate relationship with staghorn sumac. It is native and it's pretty. The problem is it grows in these clonal colonies that can kind of start to take over. So unlike some of the other sumacs that don't really have that problem, you'll end up with a great big clonal cluster of staghorn sumac. So I guess I would say grow at your own risk, maybe with that. There are some other sumacs that I'd probably use before I would use staghorn. I mean, if you already have it, fine. I'm not going to come in and say you have to get rid of it, but plant at your own risk. Let's see, are there local regulations in place for what percentage of a yard can be made up of native plants / not well kept and trimmed, if that makes sense? So great question, Alyssa. There may be some local regulations. Now, there's a couple of things I want to address in this question. First of all, native plants do not have to look unkempt or messy. Native plants can look just as well manicured and beautiful as the exotic things that we've traditionally planted. It depends on how you plant them. You can simply replace some of the non-native things with native replacements and nobody's going to know the difference. So, you're not going to have people calling the yard police on you. Now, that said, some people prefer the more prairie looking arrangements, and those are great too. We are working with many municipalities to look at their weed ordinances to make sure that they don't exclude, or to make sure that the weed ordinances don't prohibit native plants. So as long as it's something that's being tended to and cared for, it'll look like it's being tended to and cared for. I have also seen yards where they planted things in the front yard that are way too tall, don't look good, and then they just sort of let it go wild. That looks bad, and your neighbors are probably going to complain, especially if you have like a tiny 1/4 acre lot. So what I try to recommend is, in your front yard at least, get that looking tended to, and it can be tended to with native plants. You know, just make sure they're planted in a way that looks like they're tended to. And then in the backyard, let your prairie go nuts in the backyard, because most people won't care about that so much. But yes, we have run into issues with some municipalities that want to exclude things. We have sometimes been successful in fighting them and getting the municipality to change that sort of thing, and sometimes not. So we do what we can. Monarda bee balm is in the mint family, right? Yes. Is it going to be a problem child? Not as much. Sometimes it can, if it's really happy, it will spread. Not as much as some of the more invasive ones, generally because there are insects or other things that are keeping it in check. The invasive stuff doesn't have those things to keep it in check. So yes, Monarda is native and it is in the mint family. Generally speaking, it's pretty well behaved though. Are you saying that Creeping Charlie is native, or invasive, or both? I do not believe it's native. I believe it is introduced, and it generally is invasive. When we're talking about invasive things though, there's sort of a hierarchy of problem. Some things cause big problems and you know, are bad for our native stuff. Some things are introduced, but they don't cause problems. They may spread a bit and be a little obnoxious, but they don't cause the major problems like the honeysuckle and the buckthorn and things like that. So Creeping Charlie is one of those. It's introduced, it's kind of invasive. A lot of people don't like it, but it's not as awful as some of the other invasive introduced things, if that makes sense. Would moss be a good alternative for a lawn? And what do you recommend between flagstones? We currently mulch that area, but lots of weeds. Moss, you know what, I've heard a lot of people talking about that. I think moss is great. If you can do your lawn in moss, if you've got it, if it's shady and wet enough that you can do it in moss, go for it. Yeah, nothing wrong with that at all. And then between flagstones, there are some things that you can put in there. The tricky part is it's got to be something that can hold up to walking on. I know there's like a creeping thyme people have used. It's probably not native, but it works. It can be stepped on and it doesn't hurt it. You can also use, you could also use something like the pen sedge that doesn't get very tall. And I think it stands up to being walked on as well. So that pen sedge might be a good option for that as well. Let's see. I have a lot of clover too. I encourage a lot of diversity in my yard to compete with the grass, but will this be a problem when I plant native since it's a nitrogen fixer? Probably not. Really, Hillary, the problem with the nitrogen fixing is the amount that those big shrubs fix, and the fact that it's in a natural system already. So there's already sort of this equilibrium going on in the woods where these things are starting, and it just throws that out of balance. Our yards are sort of an artificial setup anyway. So I have not, the clover grows in my yard, but not in my flower beds. So I do still pull it out of my flower beds because it looks like a weed. And not that I have tons of weeds in my beds anyway, but so yeah, it really shouldn't hurt your native plants. Lynn says, I took out the Creeping Charlie and wild strawberries and clover moved in. I am not surprised by that. I actually have quite a bit of I have the mock strawberries. The mock strawberries have the yellow flower on them, and they make these like little tiny berries where the seeds are really prominently stuck out all over. They're edible, but they kind of taste like eating a sponge. They're not good at all, and pretty much nothing eats them. So it's kind of weird. So yeah, I get a lot of those in my yard too. That's another, I believe, an introduced one. But again, it's not really hurting anything. So I'm not real quick to remove that one. Kathy says, I have quite a lot of vinca and it's competing with the Pachysandra, which is mostly winning. What's the best way to start replacing the vinca? Do I need to replace the Pachysandra as well? No, I wouldn't replace the Pachysandra, but the vinca, I would just start pulling it. You know, dig and pull as much as you can on the vinca to get as much of that out as you can, and then find something else to put in there, like depending on the area, wild ginger or the native phlox, something like that, to start trying to get that to take over before other stuff. Oh, Jan says, okay, so that's, all right. Hey, Jan, watch who you're sending that to. You're sending all your responses to me instead of the person who asked, just so you know. Okay, Darlene asks, what about violets? So violets, there is a native violet. They are not invasive, and they're really a great plant to have. Love those. They're so adorable. And I have a spot in my yard where they're kind of taken over there too. I'm letting them take over. They're letting them take over in the grass because they're good. I like them. Sorry, I'm trying to read two things here. Veronica longifolia, Jan, I'm not familiar with the Latin on that one. Sorry, my Latin,
Sorry, Jamie,
yeah.
to interrupt. Yeah, so someone had posted a question in chat and she also posted it in your question and answers. And I put it privately so you could answer it live, but I'll go ahead and answer it. Veronica longifolia is not an invasive species. She was asking about that because she just purchased it. But the Veronica gentianoides, which is gentian speedwell, is the invasive species. So the species that she just purchased is fine. So just,
okay.
she just purchased it 30 minutes ago. It's in the questions and it was also in the chat. So I just put it privately so you could answer it, but now I've answered it. So sorry.
Okay. Perfect. Sorry, I just wasn't sure what we were talking about there. So, okay, sorry. Back to violets. Yeah, I like violets. My neighbors have bees, and I see bees on them all the time. I think they're really pretty, so I kind of let them take over a little bit. So, yeah, you know, and a lot with this. What I tell people when I come out to your yard, I'm never going to tell you, yes, you have to remove this or you have to remove this other plant. If you like it and it's doing well there and it's not one of the, you know, top 3 really, really bad ones like buckthorn, honeysuckle, and garlic mustard, as long as you're not trying to tell me you want to keep those, if it's healthy and doing well in your yard, keep it, you know. If, however, you want to go all native, if you want to replace it with things, that's when we start talking about, you know, what to get rid of and when. So, you know, I personally, I like the violets in my yard. I leave them. I don't mind the creeping Charlie. I leave it. It's not native, it's invasive, but I leave it because it's not worth the time and the effort that it would take to try and get rid of it. So if it's in your yard and it's doing well, leave it. And ask if I can send a picture of my own yard. No, I'm so embarrassed by the weeds in my yard right now. I got so many weeds going in my yard. I have a big yard and I kind of ignored it for a while because I was busy and usually really busy doing this kind of thing in the spring. So yeah, my yard's super embarrassing. So I'm not sending pictures, sorry. But I'm working on it. And that's the thing. These are all works in progress. You know, everybody thinks I'm going to have this gorgeous, perfect yard. It's a work in progress. It's always a work in progress. It's never done. So I see a lot of questions looking for very specific things. do me a favor, send me those in an email. Some of these I'm going to have to do a little more research on specifically because I don't know them off the top of my head. So like, for example, lily of the valley, Peter's asking about, I know it's really tricky to get rid of. I would have to look up the best way to get rid of it because yeah, that's a super invasive guy too. That one will get in and take over really. So you've got specific questions about things and I am more than happy to, let me go back here to my email. Oh, there we go. Now you can see my email anyway. Send me an email and I'm more than happy to look that up for you and help you figure out the best way to getting rid of things. So anyway, with that, I think we are going to cut it off because we are over our time. So I want to thank you all for coming out today and listening to me. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen there. There we go. So thank you again for coming out today and listening, and thank you for your efforts in helping to remove all of this stuff from your yard and from natural areas. Please send me an email if you have any questions about things. I'm more than happy to do the research for you and help point you in the right direction for these things. So thanks again so much, and I hope to see you again next week on Thursday. Remember, no webinar this Thursday, no webinar on Monday for the 4th of July holiday. But I will be back on next Thursday to talk about butterflies, which is one of my favorite topics. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you all so much, and we will see you again. Send me an email if you need any of the franchisee information for conservation at home. Otherwise, we will see you all again later. Thanks. Stay safe, everybody. Bye.